There's a moment when you stop explaining, you stop defending, you stop trying to be understood by someone who wasn't even listening, and instead of loud exits and emotional storms, you choose something more powerful, silence. But not the kind of silence that comes from fear or retreat. No, the silence I'm talking about comes from clarity. It comes from strength, and when you operate from that space, it speaks louder than any words you could ever say. When you do this silently, when you rise, shift, grow, and detach without announcement, they feel it deeply. See, people expect noise. They expect conflict, reactions, or chaos when they lose access to you. But when you simply go still, when you stop feeding the energy that used to chase, fix, or explain, you break a pattern, you disrupt the entire dynamic, because they don't just lose your words, they lose your presence, your light, your support, your attention. And that absence, wrapped in your silence, echoes louder than any message you never sent. When your silence becomes your boundary, something profound shifts, not just in how others perceive you, but in how you carry yourself. For too long, you may have filled the silence with explanations, over-apologies, and emotional labor that no one was actually earning. You tried to be understood. You tried to be enough. You tried to keep the peace by giving pieces of yourself. But eventually, there comes a moment when you realize words won't fix what patterns have broken, so you stop speaking, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You realize that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you've said all there is to say, and the most powerful message you'll ever send is not written in words. It's felt through absence. There's a different kind of strength that rises in you when you no longer argue your worth. You're not cold, you're not distant, you're just done using your voice to convince someone to value what they already should have. Your silence becomes sacred. It becomes the space where your dignity lives. The space where you stop giving second chances just to avoid discomfort. You stop repeating your needs just to be ignored. You stop hoping someone will wake up when they've already hit snooze on you too many times. And suddenly, silence feels lighter than noise, more peaceful than persuasion. That boundary you create in silence is not a wall, it's a door that only those who come correct can walk through. It's your way of saying, I'm no longer available for confusion, I'm no longer available for inconsistency, I'm not here to be half loved or half heard. People feel that deeply, especially those who were used to your energy always being accessible. Those who took your explanations for granted, who thought your emotions would always be on tap, who depended on your forgiveness even when they hadn't changed. The minute you go still, they notice. Not because you're playing games, but because you've grown out of explaining your pain to someone who caused it. Silence, when it's rooted in self-respect, creates a tension they can't ignore. It's no longer a conversation, it's a consequence. A reflection of how much you've evolved, and you don't need to defend that evolution. You don't owe anyone a dramatic exit or a final speech. You've simply stepped back, and in doing so, you've stepped up. That's what they feel. The sudden loss of your presence, the quiet certainty that you're no longer trying to fix or follow or hold on. You're not being cruel. You're being clear, and clarity, when paired with silence, becomes an impenetrable boundary. One that says, I value my peace more than your comfort. And in that space, you reclaim every part of yourself you once handed over in exchange for being heard. Now you listen to you, and that shift. It's felt louder than anything you could have ever said out loud. When you withdraw your emotional energy, something dramatic and almost spiritual happens. You stop bleeding for someone who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. You stop giving your time, attention, love, and compassion to a dynamic that constantly left you empty, and the moment you do that, the balance of power shifts, not in a manipulative way, but in a self-restorative way. You begin to see clearly how much you were investing in someone who was comfortable receiving but unwilling to reciprocate. You see how much of your emotional strength was being poured into trying to understand, fix, or hold together something that wasn't honoring you in return. This withdrawal isn't about becoming cold or shutting down your heart. It's about preservation. It's about survival. You can't keep handing out emotional energy like it's infinite, especially to people who use it carelessly. So you begin to redirect it, not out of revenge but out of necessity. You no longer send long messages to be ignored. You no longer break your own boundaries just to be close. You stop checking their mood before expressing your truth. And slowly, steadily, you return to you, that same energy you once gave so freely to them. You begin giving it to your own healing, your own growth, your own goals. People feel emotional withdrawal in a way that no words can ever replicate. When they're used to being emotionally fed by your presence, your forgiveness, your reassurance, your availability, and that suddenly stops, it creates a silence that screams. It's not about blocking or ghosting or creating chaos. It's the calmest move you've ever made, but it feels the heaviest to them, because for once they're no longer receiving your love like a given. They're feeling the loss of it. And not because you want them to suffer, but because you finally realized your emotions are not a vending machine they can access on demand. And here's the truth. When you pull back your energy, you don't just create space, you create clarity. You start seeing what was real and what was one-sided. You begin to understand that love without effort, presence, or emotional safety isn't love, it's attachment. And you're not interested in being attached to pain anymore. You want peace. You want depth. You want to be seen, not just tolerated, so you stop giving away the most sacred parts of you to someone who only showed up when it was convenient. In that silence, in that stillness, you're not waiting. You're rebuilding. You're no longer reacting to their absence because your own presence has become enough. That's when they feel it deeply. The warmth, the access, the connection they once assumed would always be there, is no longer available, and suddenly your emotional energy, once taken for granted, becomes the very thing they miss the most. When you stop explaining your worth, a quiet revolution begins within you. For so long, you may have exhausted yourself trying to be understood, over-explaining, over-proving, overextending. You tried to show your heart clearly, hoping they would finally see the love, effort, and loyalty you were offering. But every time your worth was questioned, overlooked, or treated like an optional luxury instead of a sacred gift, it chipped away at your self-trust until one day something in you shifts and you just stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You no longer argue for a seat at a table you built. You no longer beg someone to see your value through their limited lens. You realize that real worth isn't something to be debated. It's something to be embodied. And the moment you choose to stop explaining is the moment you stop negotiating with people who can't meet you where you are. That silence becomes your strength. It becomes a declaration. I no longer need you to see me clearly for me to stand fully in my light. When you were constantly justifying your actions, trying to be good enough, adjusting yourself to fit someone else's standards, you were slowly disconnecting from your core. You were losing the quiet confidence that says, I am whole with or without your approval. But now, without a single announcement, you reclaim that wholeness. You don't send another message trying to make them understand. You don't draft another paragraph explaining your side. You simply stop needing to be got, and instead, you get yourself. This creates a deep, unspoken impact because people notice when the person who once tried so hard to be heard suddenly goes silent. They feel the absence of effort. The space once filled with explanations and reassurance is now filled with stillness, and in that stillness your worth roars. You're not angry, you're not spiteful. You've just stopped handing over your power for the sake of someone else's understanding. You've stopped offering your value to someone who wouldn't hold it with care. And the beautiful thing is, when you stop explaining, you create space for those who don't need you to. The right people see you. They feel your depth without you having to water it down, but more importantly, you see you. Fully, clearly, without condition, you stop looking outward for recognition because your self-worth has been rewritten from within, and that kind of silent strength, it's unshakable, it speaks for itself. And to the ones who didn't value it when you were speaking, it hits the loudest when you finally go quiet. When you stop reacting and start evolving, you shift from being controlled by someone else's behavior to becoming the author of your own growth. For so long, your emotional energy may have been tangled in their words, their silence, their inconsistency. You waited for responses, you matched their moods, you replayed every interaction in your mind, trying to decode what it meant. That reactive state had you dancing in circles, not because you lacked strength, but because you were seeking stability in a place that was never designed to give it. But then something clicks. You get tired, not just physically, but spiritually. You reach a point where reacting feels like betrayal to yourself, and that's when the evolution begins. Instead of asking, what are they doing? You start asking, who am I becoming? Instead of chasing validation, you start chasing purpose. You stop living in emotional limbo and start taking action toward the life you want. One day, one boundary, one breath at a time. This shift is internal, but its effects are undeniable, because the more you evolve, the less you feel the need to respond to what no longer aligns with you. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to post cryptic messages. You're too focused on building a version of yourself that doesn't have to react. Because you've outgrown the game, the transformation is subtle yet seismic. You stop measuring your worth by their attention or absence. You stop letting their energy dictate your emotions, and suddenly they're hot and cold behavior no longer has the power to freeze your forward motion. You're not ignoring them to hurt them. You're prioritizing your growth because it's sacred. You begin to evolve not for them to notice, but because you're tired of shrinking to stay in spaces where you weren't seen. And as you rise, they feel the distance, they feel the shift, because the person they used to trigger, chase, confuse, or control simply isn't there anymore. And here's the thing, evolution isn't loud. It's quiet. It happens in the moments you choose to journal instead of vent, to move forward instead of linger, to let go instead of hold on. It's in the silence of your boundaries, the calm in your presence, and the focus in your eyes. You begin to glow differently, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because peace looks good on you, growth looks good on you. Detachment from chaos becomes your new power. While they may be waiting for the old version of you to show up, the one who would have reacted, chased, explained, you're already gone, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You've evolved beyond the dynamic that kept you stuck. And that evolution doesn't need an audience, it just needs you, because the moment you stop reacting, you reclaim your power, and when you evolve in silence, trust me, they feel it loudly. When you stop chasing closure and instead become it, you reach a powerful level of emotional maturity and freedom. For so long, you may have held on, not to the person, but to the need for an ending that made sense, a reason, an apology, a clean conclusion that could allow you to move on in peace. But over time, you realize that closure doesn't always come wrapped in the words you wish they would say. Sometimes it doesn't come from them at all. It comes from you when you decide that their silence is enough of an answer, that their patterns are louder than their promises, and that your healing doesn't need their permission. Letting go of the need for closure is one of the hardest things to do because the mind craves explanation. You want to know why they changed, why they didn't try harder, why they walked away when all you did was love them with everything you had. But healing begins the moment you stop chasing those answers and start creating your own peace. You shift from being stuck in the story to rewriting the ending, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but because you deserve to be free. You stop waiting for them to come back and make it right, and instead, you become the one who makes it right for yourself. There's an incredible calm that comes over you when you realize you no longer need them to understand the pain they caused. You no longer need them to see your side, to recognize your worth, or to regret how they treated you. You understand that closure is a choice. It's the decision to no longer let someone's confusion define your clarity, and that decision doesn't need to be announced or explained. It just needs to be lived. Quietly, firmly, authentically, you carry your peace not because everything made sense, but because you made yourself the priority. And while they may be expecting a reaction, an argument, a dramatic exit, you give them none of that. Instead, they're met with your stillness, your silence, your strength, and that absence, it speaks volumes, because nothing confuses someone more than the person they thought would never stop fighting for them, choosing instead to fight for themselves. They feel it. They feel the shift, and maybe, just maybe, that's when they start realizing what they lost. But by then, it's no longer about whether they come back. It's about how far you've come. When you stop chasing closure and become it, you liberate yourself. You stop revisiting the wound and start focusing on the healing. You move with grace, with purpose, and with a deeper understanding of your worth. You close the chapter, not because the story was perfect, but because you're ready to write a new one. And that, right there, is the kind of silent power that echoes forever. When you speak through your absence, you deliver the loudest message of all. You don't need to announce that you're done. You don't need to explain why you're pulling back. You don't need to draft long messages about how much it hurt. Instead, you let your absence speak for you. You let your silence say what your words no longer will. That withdrawal, that quiet exit, it's not meant to punish. It's meant to protect, because you've finally realized that your energy is sacred, and where it's not valued, it no longer belongs. You used to show up consistently. You used to be there, emotionally available, giving, waiting, hoping. And the pattern repeated. You were always accessible, always ready to fix, to understand, to forgive. But something shifted. You stopped making yourself available to situations that made you feel unseen, unheard, and unsettled. And when you removed yourself, not with bitterness but with clarity, your absence began to fill the space louder than your presence ever did. Suddenly, the one who was always there wasn't, and that absence is felt deeply, especially by those who assumed you'd never leave. People take consistency for granted until it's gone. When they no longer hear from you, when your support vanishes, when your energy stops showing up in the background, they feel the weight of what they lost. Not because you said it with words, but because they experience the void left behind. It disrupts the rhythm they were used to. The attention, the love, the light you brought, it's no longer available on demand. And it makes them pause, it makes them question, it makes them feel, but here's what matters most. You're not doing it for their reaction. You're doing it for your healing. You didn't walk away to be missed. You walked away to reclaim yourself. Your absence isn't a tactic, it's a truth. It's the natural result of no longer tolerating what diminished your light. And even if they never admit it, even if they never say a word, they notice. They notice when your energy is no longer reaching out. They notice when your love isn't present. They notice when the one who used to be emotionally available becomes completely, powerfully unavailable. And while they're sitting with the silence, you're rising within it. You're not waiting for them to return. You're creating something new within you and around you. The version of you who once poured endlessly into them has shifted that energy inward. And that transformation, that growth, that peace, it says everything. So no, you didn't speak with words, but you spoke through your absence, and that message, it lands, it echoes, it changes everything. There comes a moment when you no longer feel the need to shout, to explain, or to react, not because you've grown cold, but because you've grown wise. Your silence isn't a void, it's a presence. It's the clearest signal that you've stepped into yourself, worth without needing external validation. And in that silence, everything becomes louder to the one who once overlooked you, because now they're left alone with the echo of your absence, and it speaks louder than your voice ever could. You've shifted the dynamic by no longer feeding it. You've changed the game by stepping out of it. Silence is not about control, it's about release. You've stopped trying to force someone to understand, to care, or to stay, and by doing that, you've freed yourself. You've chosen to no longer be emotionally accessible to someone who didn't offer you emotional safety. You've broken the cycle of over-explaining, over-giving, and under-receiving. And when you do that, people notice. Especially those who took your presence for granted. Suddenly, the energy they depended on is gone, the access they abused is revoked, and the calm strength you now carry becomes a mirror to everything they couldn't give you. But the greatest part is this: your silence doesn't need to be understood by them, it just needs to be honored by you. You are not responsible for how someone receives your peace, you are only responsible for choosing it. You've realized that love, attention, and respect are not things to be begged for. They are either freely given or not worth having. So instead of waiting for someone to value you, you've decided to value yourself. Quietly, consistently, unapologetically, that's the kind of growth that shifts your entire reality. And while they might eventually come back, realizing the weight of your silence, you're no longer standing in the same place. You've evolved, you've elevated. The version of you they took for granted doesn't exist anymore. You're not seeking a reaction. You're not hoping for closure. You've already found it. In the stillness, in the healing, in the power of your own presence. What once needed noise to feel seen now only requires truth, and you're walking in that truth with a grace they'll never forget. Thank you for being here today, truly. Thank you for showing up for yourself, for choosing growth, and for opening your heart to a message that may not always be easy, but is absolutely necessary. If something in this resonated with you, it's not by accident. It means you're ready, ready to stop explaining, ready to stop chasing, ready to sit in the power of your silence and let that silence speak for you. You are not here to be half loved, misunderstood, or overlooked. You are here to be honored, respected, and valued, not just by others, but most importantly by you. So if you're learning to walk away quietly, if you're building boundaries in silence, and if you're reclaiming your energy without the need for noise, you're not weak. You're powerful, you are rising, you are healing, and trust me, they feel it. If you're walking through that silence right now, just know you're not alone. You are never alone in your transformation. Every step you take, whether it's loud or quiet, is still a step forward. Keep going. Keep choosing your peace over pressure, yourself, worth over validation, and your future over your past. Thank you for your time, your energy, and your presence. It matters, you matter, never forget that. Until next time, take care of your soul, guard your energy, and walk forward with quiet confidence. Goodbye for now, and keep rising.